Hello friends, I am Arpit and I am here with today's analysis. Today is 4th of February and we are going to deal with two very important topics which are in news. There's a comparison between the subsidy bill of the government from 2014 till 2019 and 2019 till 2024. Now in the first leg, that is 2014 to 2019, the subsidy bill of the government was reduced. Why? Because of the easing of international crude oil prices. During this time, the government did not pass on the benefits to the people, instead raised some taxes on the fuels to fund other programs of the government like housing programs or other sanitation programs which the government launched. Whereas in 2019 to 2024, the subsidy burden on the government increased substantially, courtesy COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war, where the spending increased. The cost of fertilizers, fuel and food, all of them increased. That is why we see an increased subsidy burden on the government from 2019 till 2024. Second is the nano diammonium phosphate, NanoDAP. This fertilizer was talked about in this year's budget speech by the finance minister, stating that this nano DAP's application will be there in all the agroclimatic zones of the country. Nano DAP is basically an important fertilizer. DAP actually is the second most used fertilizer after urea. It helps in the plant growth. Nano DAP as compared to DAP is having a better surface area to volume ratio, which leads to less usage of fertilizers. Less usage of fertilizers, less subsidy burden on the government because government subsidizes fertilizers. Then it is indigenously prepared, so less import burden on the government. And most importantly, it is more effective than its conventional counterpart, that is DAP. After adoption of nano urea, which was a success, now nano DAP is into picture. So let's get started with both these topics and we will see what is there. Now, this particular topic is kind of a comparison between the subsidy bill of the government in 2014 to 19, these 5 years, and the next 5 years, which is basically the immediate preceding 5 years. Now, when the new government came to power in 2014, government launched a lot of, I would say, welfare schemes for the people. And government had the money to fund it also. Why and how, we will see. The blessing which the government got was reduced international crude oil prices, which the government actually, took advantage of. So, from new welfarism to a renewed emphasis on subsidies. Renewed emphasis on subsidies was during this period, and new welfarism was during this period. In this particular period, 2019 to 24, incidents like COVID happened, then the Russia-Ukraine war happened, which led to a lot of inflation of essential commodities like food, fertilizer or fuel. And, most of it, either the fuel or the fertilizers, the government subsidizes. Particularly the burden on government was fertilizer subsidies, to be precise, because we were getting discounted fuel from Russia. Food production was, by God's grace, ample in our country. We were not dependent as such on any other countries apart from, oil palm. Now, we need to understand this from new welfarism to a renewed emphasis on subsidies and transfers. What is new welfarism and why this happened? This period, 2014 to 15 to 2018-19, saw many schemes launched by the government related to housing, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Swachh Bharat Mission, drinking water like Jal Jeevan Mission and all were there, bank accounts, the Jan Dhan Yojana, electricity, cooking gas connections and all. All these were provided to the people. Now, for these kind of schemes, public funding increased. But despite of that increased allocation of fund or public spending increasing, still the government was in a good shape. The former chief economic advisor, Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, termed it as new welfarism. The centre's subsidy bill fell, that was good, both in absolute and relative terms, and the centre's spending for welfare schemes increased. So it is like benefits on both the sides. That is why new welfarism it was called as. Generally what happens is the centre's subsidy bill rises, then only the welfare is ensured of the people. But here both the things happened. Centre's subsidy bill also fell and the welfare also rose. This is what actually happened. And how this happened, we will see. What happened from 2014 to 2019? Between 13-14 and 18-19, the centre's spending on major subsidies, the 3 years, food, fertilizer and fuel, dropped from rupees 2,44,717 crore to rupees 1,96,769 crore. This is between 2013-14 to 2018-19. In absolute terms, the subsidy burden reduced on all these three Fs, and these are the major areas of subsidy where the government provides subsidy. Now, in absolute terms, it is falling means there is something really good because population is rising. It can fall as a percentage of GDP or as a proportion of GDP, but in absolute terms, it is falling. That is something really good. Now, relative to GDP, we will see this figure how much this fell relative to GDP, because see, in absolute terms it is reducing and the GDP was growing because there was growth rate every year, which we know that. Now, relative to GDP, it more than halved from 2.2% in 2013-14. The subsidy burden was 2.2%, means this was 2.2% of the GDP, to just over 1%. This was 1% of the GDP. So in proportion terms also it fell. Now, even after adding outlays to schemes like Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act and PM Kisan, these were, the spendings of the government. Even if we add this, then also we saw a decline from 2.5 to 1.4% of GDP. So these are basically the figures. What happened? What were the drivers? The drivers were reduced prices of oil at the international level. Now here we need to understand that how the government actually capitalized on this particular situation or this particular blessing. Now the crude oil was being imported at around $60.84 per barrel during this period, and the cost of the same barrel was 96.05 in the preceding 5 financial years, means last 5 years, 2009 to 2014. So 2009 to 2014, this was the cost. 2014 to 2019, this was the cost. So clearly it is a saving of $36 per barrel, and millions and billions of barrels are imported in India. 85% of India's oil is imported, and if oil is expensive, everything gets expensive. That is a basic, I would say, understanding of economics. Now, how did the government capitalize on this situation? We need to understand. The Modi government, perhaps wisely then, did not pass on the full benefit of the lower global prices to the Indian consumers. For us, the prices did not fall as it fell over here. They were largely stagnant, I would say, or marginally increased also. Instead, what the government did, it raised the excise duties on diesel, petrol and other fuel products. So see, the prices falling from 96 to 60, and here the subsidy burden reducing. On the other hand, government increased the excise duty on petrol and diesel, means government's income increasing, subsidy falling. So let's see, look at these figures. 2012-13 and 13-14, these 2 years, center's subsidy outgo, how much center gave subsidies on petroleum products? Rupees 96,880 crore in 2012-13 and 85,378 crore in 13-14. This was the subsidy outgo of the government on petroleum products. And in these 2 years, 2012-13 and 13-14, what was the income of the government from excise duties on these? Now, 63,478 crore, which is obviously, this is the income and this is the expenditure in the form of subsidies of the government. So, expenditure is more as compared to the income, which we can see over here. This is in 2012-13. Similarly was the case in 13-14. 13 May, expenditure was 85,000 crore rupees and in income in the form of that levying of excise duty was 67,000 crore rupees. So we can clearly see in these 2 years, the center's subsidy outgo was more as compared to the income from levying the excise duties. Now we will see during those years when the government actually was capitalizing on the reduced oil prices internationally. But by 2017-18 and 18-19, the subsidy on fuels was 24,460 crore and 24,837 crore. This was largely due to the reduced oil prices globally. Stood far below the collection from excise. Excise 2,29,716 crore and 2,14,369 crore. This was the collection of excise duties on petroleum products. And this was the subsidy which was being given by the governments. Now here the government earned a lot of money and financed those other welfare schemes for either housing, for sanitation, for drinking water or XYZ, any other thing. So this is how the government capitalized on this. In short, the Modi government used the easing of international crude oil prices to not just trim its fuel subsidy outlay, but also mobilize additional resources that could now finance other expenditures, including the new welfarism schemes. And this I talked about the crude oil prices, and similar was the situation with fertilizers also. The gains from lower landed cost of imported finished fertilizers and raw materials were pocketed by the center in the form of subsidy savings and not the farmers. It was not given to the farmers. What happened from 2019 till now? That is this period in which the government's subsidy burden increased. Now the major subsidies soaring from 1% of GDP in 2018-19 to 3.6% in 2020-21. So we saw that 1% of the GDP, it came, the subsidy burden of the government. It went up to 3.6% in 2020-21. COVID year, it is. And from 1.4% to 4.4% if we take into account MGNREGA and PM Kisan also. PM Kisan though started in the end of 2018, December 2018 it started, where 6,000 rupees per eligible farmer per year is disbursed to them in their bank accounts to meet the expenses of the agricultural inputs. So if we consider these two outlays also, then from 1.4 to 4.4%. While these have since dipped to 1.9% and 2.5% in 2022-23, means 3.6 say it has come down to 1.9% and 4.4 say it has come down to 2.5%. So it is like this. They are more or less at the levels when the Modi government took over. In 2014, they are at those levels when the government came in 2014. Now in absolute terms too, the 3F subsidies peaked at 7,07,707 crore rupees in 2020-21, the COVID year. Obviously, it will be the maximum. And if I include MGNREGA and PM Kisan, the government's expenditure was 8,79,866 crore rupees. Now even at 5,30,959 crore rupees, and if we take into account both MGNREGA and PM Kisan, it is this figure. In 2022-23, they were over 2.5 times their corresponding levels in 2018-19. 2018-19 was a golden year, I would say, till then. From 2014 to 2019 were golden years for the government, because on one hand subsidy bill was reducing and on the other hand the income of the government was increasing. due to which the government was able to fund various welfare projects in the country. Now, the drivers which led to increase of the subsidy burden in this time period 2019 till now. There have been two key drivers of the spiraling effect. First is basically the government decided to fully provide for the food and fertilizer subsidy. Now, Food Corporation of India, it procures, I would say, food grains from the farmers, gives them, I would say, money, MSP. It sells those food grains through the PDS system, that is public distribution system, National Food Security Act. Now, that is sold at subsidized prices. Now, FCI has to take loans from, I would say, various organizations like National Saving Security Fund and all. So the loan burden on FCI was increasing a lot to meet those gaps, because it is paying the farmers at the MSP, but it is taking from the people subsidized prices, 3 rupees kilo rice, 2 rupees kilo wheat and 1 rupees kilo coarse grains. So there was a deficit with FCI. The government decided to pay this deficit once and all and settle this rupees 3,39,236 crore outstanding of FCI to NSSF. And similarly was the situation in fertilizer industry. So those accounts were settled by the government, due to which the government had to spend this money. Spending increased. Obviously, this burden increased on the government. Second driver was COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, the pandemic-induced COVID distress led to record offtake of rice and wheat through the public distribution system. Now, the government in 2020 launched this Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Already National Food Security Act was there, which was providing 5 kgs of subsidized food grains per person per priority in the priority household per month. At 3 rupees kilo rice, 2 rupees kilo wheat, 1 rupees kilo coarse grains. And to Antyodaya Anna Yojana households under National Food Security Act, these were being provided at 35 kgs per household at the same price, 3 rupees, 2 rupees, 1 rupees. In addition to these allocations, 5 kg per person per month, wheat and rice were allocated free of cost under Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. So that increased the burden on the government, because the government was very keen on meeting the basic necessities at least of survival for the people during these tough years, that is food. So government provided increased allocation of food grains under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Apart from it, spending on MG Narega also increased, so that people in the rural areas, they have jobs, they have money in their hands, and they are not impacted, or their lives are not impacted due to COVID. Now, when the war came, Russia-Ukraine war, it led to increase of prices of food, fertilizer and fuel. Out of these 3 F's, food was not a problem for India largely, because we are self-sufficient in food cultivation and growth, apart from a few products like oil seeds and all. Second F, that is fuel, that was also settled largely because we were getting discounted oil from Russia. But fertilizer, that was a problem. We were not getting it at discounted prices, neither we were Atmanirbhar in that. So that increased a lot. That is why it is written that the war's impact was mainly on international fertilizer prices for India. The average landed prices of imported urea surged from roughly $263 per ton in 2020-21 to $661 in 2021-22. In 1 year, see, from 263 it went up to 661, roughly 3 times, if I say 2.5 to 3 times. And it dropped marginally to $627 in 2022-23. Now the corresponding increases were from $369 to $741 and 805 per ton of diammonium phosphate, and $239 to $359 in case of muriate of potash. All these fertilizers prices increased. And when they increased, the government then decided that this increased prices should not be passed on to the farmers, and decided to bear the cost of it. Means the subsidy burden of the government with respect to fertilizers shot up. On the other hand, to keep the oil prices at par, although the government was getting discounted oil, but that discount, after discount also, the oil which we were getting, the prices were high. The central government decided to bring its excise duty to zero. Means government's income was also reduced over there in terms of fuel. That is why we were able to get fuel at almost the same price which was there before the war. Now, this is what the steps were taken by the government in this era or in this particular 5 years. With the Modi government choosing not to allow pass-through of higher costs to farmers, the net outcome was near doubling of fertilizer subsidy. Earlier, fertilizer subsidy which the government bore was 1,27,922 crore. Now it became 2,51,339 crore in 2021 and 2023. So this is what happened. That is why the subsidy burden of the government increased. The income of the government reduced because government decided that we will be taking zero excise duty on petroleum. And that is how the government in the previous 5 years earned a lot of money. And here, when the situation was grim, there was, I would say, a lot of crisis globally. It did not let these crises impact the common people. And that is why India's economy, you see, growing at a very fast pace. So this is something which I would say was commendable on the part of the government, but yes, subsidy burden presently is high. Next is NanoDAP phosphate. The Finance Minister Sitaraman in her budget speech said this application of NanoDAP, which is a fertilizer, will be there in all agroclimatic zones. Now we've just seen the importance of fertilizers and we've seen the, I would say, price rise of DAP also, which almost doubled during the Russia-Ukraine crisis. We are importing it, so we are dependent upon it. But yes, IFFCO basically says, IFFCO is one of the leading fertilizer producers in the country. It has generated or created this new variety of DAP which is called as NanoDAP. The plant is in Gujarat. Last to last year, it created NanoUrea. Now NanoDAP is created. Last year, our Home Minister inaugurated the plant of NanoDAP in Gujarat. So first of all, it is indigenously produced. It will be reducing the import bill and it is very much cost effective. It will reduce the subsidy burden of the government as well. So that is why the Finance Minister is saying that NanoDAP will be there in all agroclimatic zones after the successful adoption of NanoUrea. So this is what the news is about, but what we need to know is that what is DAP, then what is NanoDAP and what is the difference between DAP and NanoDAP over here. DAP or diammonium phosphate, as I said, it is the second most used fertilizer after urea. It is rich in phosphorus that stimulates root establishment and development. In short, it is very much important for the growth of the plants, or will take too long to mature if we do not apply DAP. It is thus applied just before or at the time of sowing. Now DAP versus NanoDAP. Now IFFCO, Indian Farmers Fertilizers Cooperatives, NanoDAP, NanoUrea was also developed by IFFCO. It contains 8% nitrogen and 16% phosphorus by volume. Unlike conventional DAP, which comes in granular form, this NanoDAP is in liquid form. First difference is this. Now IFFCO's website says that it has an advantage in terms of surface area to volume, as its particle size is less than 100 nanometer. So less number of, I would say, particles of DAP will cover more area. This is what it simply means, which simply translates to this thing that it is more effective than its traditional counterpart, that is DAP. This tiny particle size makes NanoDAP more efficient than its conventional counterpart. Now, how it is more efficient? it will enter easily inside the seed surface or through stomata and other plant openings. Better assimilation of the fertilizer inside the plant system in turn leads to higher seed vigor, more chlorophyll, photosynthetic efficiency, better quality and increase in crop yield. So size does not matter actually. Smaller it is, the better it is over here in this case, because it will be able to penetrate deep into the seeds, which will, create these benefits. It is more pocket friendly than its conventional counterpart. Why I am saying this? Because a 500 ml bottle of NanoDAP equivalent to a 50 kg bag of conventional DAP is priced at only rupees 600, and this 50 kg bag costed around 1350 rupees. So it is less than half of it. Since the government provides significant subsidies on DAP, the adoption of a more inexpensive fertilizer will likely be a significant relief to the government subsidy burden, which is already very high, which we saw in the last topic. And major drivers of subsidy burden in the present, I would say, times is fertilizer subsidy, especially after the Russia-Ukraine war. Now for farmers, Nano DAP is also significantly more convenient. Simply put, 500 ml bottles are easier to transport, store and use than 50 kg bags. Fertilizer is sprayed on crops with 250 to 500 ml of DAP dissolved in water required per spray per acre. And it will definitely reduce the import burden of the government because it is a made in India product. So these kind of innovations definitely can save the government from many burdens, including one of the biggest burden on the government, that is the subsidy burden. It will also, save the government from the rising imports. It will also make us Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, if it's successful in all the agroclimatic zones of the country, we can also look for exporting this fertilizer to other countries. And this is basically what the magic of research and development is. And with this, we come to an end of today's session. I will be meeting you tomorrow now with more such informative news pieces. Till then, you guys very well know what to do. Keep studying, keep reading, keep writing, and most importantly, keep revising. Namaste. Jai Hind.